Imagine standing in the echoing corridors of a Roman villa at twilight. The marble beneath your feet feels cool, the air heavy with incense and rose oil. Oil lamps flicker along painted walls, their flames bending in the faint evening draft. Behind thin fabric curtains, you catch hushed voices, women whispering, laughter dissolving into secrets. A society that measured beauty, loyalty, and morality through rituals we can barely comprehend. From behind a silk partition, Adina, a noblewoman, listens to her attendants discussing tomorrow's preparations. One mixes crushed pearls into cream, another sharpens bronze tweezers over a flame. They gossip about perfumes and men, about envy and survival. These are not idle conversations. They are lessons in how to live under an empire where appearances could mean the difference between honor and ruin. A senator's wife steps from her chamber, her face ghostly pale beneath a layer of lead-based powder. Her lips gleam with a dangerous red mercury rouge. Each movement is graceful, deliberate, rehearsed. The beauty that elevates her also quietly destroys her. Poison disguised as luxury. To maintain elegance was to risk death, and yet every noblewoman did so willingly. Slaves applying poison by command, day after day. She glides toward her husband's study, where guests await. The conversation will be political, the smiles courteous, but everything, every gesture, every silence, is a performance within Rome's unspoken hierarchy. Her beauty is both armor and chain. In this world, the private is political, and even the act of applying perfume carries weight in the empire's machinery of control. The Rome we remember for conquest and empire also thrived on invisible rituals, domestic acts, sensual customs, and subtle oppressions. What we call intimacy today was, in their world, a public duty. The Roman home was not a refuge from politics. It was an extension of it. And every household, from the humblest to the grandest, mirrored the empire's obsession with dominance and order. But beneath the perfume and marble, another truth lingered. One preserved not in legend, but in ash. When Pompeii fell silent, it carried these secrets into eternity. In Part 2, we step into those ruins and discover what Rome chose to hide. In 79 AD, the skies above Pompeii darkened as Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying the city beneath a storm of ash and pumice. Thousands perished, but in death, something extraordinary happened. Daily life was sealed like an insect in amber. Not just temples or marketplaces, but the most intimate corners of existence. Bedrooms, bathhouses, and private shrines. What survived wasn't the grandeur of Rome, but its vulnerabilities, the moments people never meant for history to see. Archaeologists uncovered frescoes that stunned even the jaded scholars of the 19th century. Walls alive with erotic art, scenes of lovers, mythic seductions, and divine punishments. What modern minds deemed obscene, Romans saw as natural. These images weren't hidden. They adorned dining rooms, courtyards, and taverns. Pleasure wasn't shameful. It was sacred, tied to fertility and fortune. The gods themselves were imagined as beings of appetite and desire. Roman bathhouses tell another story, a world of heat, steam, and hierarchy. Men and women often bathed separately, but boundaries blurred in shared courtyards where whispers and glances replaced words. Beneath the hiss of steam, deals were made, alliances sealed, and temptations indulged. The baths weren't just for cleansing the body. They were where politics met pleasure, where the scent of oil mingled with ambition. Writers like Seneca complained about the chaos beneath their apartments. The clatter of weights, the groans from massages, the laughter of flirtation, the shouts of merchants, and the muffled sounds of pleasures sold in shadow. For him, it was a nuisance. For historians, it's a window into a society where the line between public and private dissolved completely. In Rome, even silence was political, everything had a price, even modesty. In those frozen rooms of Pompeii, archaeologists found perfume bottles still sealed with resin, cosmetic jars with finger marks, bronze mirrors that had reflected faces now lost to time. They were not just artifacts. They were echoes of touch, scent, and desire. Through them, we see a civilization that was not ashamed of its intimacy, yet used it to reinforce power and control. Each object was a whisper from a world that refused to be silent even in death. The eruption of Vesuvius froze more than bodies. It captured a mirror of humanity. In the cast figures of lovers locked together, servants shielding their masters, and women still clutching cosmetic boxes, we find the truth Rome rarely spoke aloud. Intimacy was not love. It was duty, ritual, and often a form of control. And in Pompeii's stillness, those truths breathe again, through ashes that remember. Beneath Pompeii's ashes lay a city of secrets, but its rules of desire didn't die there. In Part 3, we enter the world of Rome's elite, where virtue was a mask and chastity was currency. To understand Rome's women of power, one must first understand a single word: pudicitia. Loosely translated, it means modesty or chastity, but in truth it governed far more than sexual virtue. It defined a woman's worth, her family's honor, even her husband's political reputation. Every gesture, every garment, every silence was weighed against this ideal. To the Romans, purity wasn't private. It was a performance staged for society's approval. For elite women, virtue was theater. Their public appearances were choreographed. Eyes lowered, voice soft, movements restrained. They lived in marble cages of etiquette, worshipped for restraint more than intelligence or passion. A matron's reputation could make or destroy her husband's career. Her body was his banner, her silence, his glory. Even within her own home, she was an emblem, not an individual. Livia Drusilla, wife of Emperor Augustus, perfected this illusion better than any. She was celebrated as Rome's model of womanly virtue, loyal, modest, wise. Statues immortalized her as the embodiment of pudicitia, veiled, eyes cast downward. But behind the image, she was anything but passive. Livia quietly commanded one of the most intricate networks of informants in Roman history, slave girls embedded in aristocratic households who listened, observed, and reported back. In a world where men ruled through laws, she ruled through secrets. Information was Livia's weapon, and the private sphere her battlefield. She understood that Rome's true power didn't lie in the Senate or the battlefield, but in whispers, in what happened after the lamps were extinguished. Even the empire's greatest generals were vulnerable not to swords, but to scandal. A rumor, a letter, or a lover's confession could end a dynasty faster than any rebellion. Through women like Livia, Rome's ideals of chastity became paradoxes, symbols of submission that hid immense influence. To remain pure was to survive. To be modest was to manipulate. Every Roman matron learned this silent diplomacy, to move within the boundaries drawn by men, while quietly redrawing them from within. But purity was only one side of Rome's illusion. Behind every vow of virtue stood a transaction. And in Part 4, we uncover the machinery of marriage, where love was a luxury and politics wore the mask of devotion. Marriage in ancient Rome was rarely about love. It was a transaction, a contract written in wax, sealed with lineage and dowry. Families didn't marry people, they merged assets. Behind every ceremony was an alliance, a political strategy, a calculation of bloodlines. And standing at the center of it all was a girl, often no older than 14, dressed in gold and saffron, trembling beneath a veil that felt heavier than armor. The night before her wedding, she would be bathed in perfumed water and adorned with sacred ribbons. Her hair, once a symbol of childhood, was divided into 6 braids using a spearhead from a fallen soldier, a reminder that fertility required courage. As the household gods watched in silence, her mother whispered the duties of a wife: obedience, discretion, endurance. Love was never mentioned. At dawn, musicians filled the air with the shrill notes of flutes. The bride was lifted over the threshold, not in romance but in ritual. Romans believed evil spirits lingered at doorways, waiting to curse the union. Crossing without touching the ground was meant to outwit them. As she entered her new home, her childhood ended. She belonged now not to her father, nor to herself, but to her husband's lineage. Inside, the marriage bed waited, draped in deep crimson cloth, consecrated by prayers and offerings to Venus. Elder women supervised the scene, ensuring purity, order, and compliance. Beyond the ceremony, there was only silence and expectation. The bed symbolized more than union. It was proof of fertility, of political continuity. The sheets, often stained, were displayed as evidence of success. The body turned into contract. Roman authors wrote of these moments in tones both clinical and cruel. Pliny the Younger once described a bride trembling as her family dressed her, unable to grasp the meaning of marriage beyond ceremony. Her husband, twice her age, waited impatiently behind the curtain. For her, duty began before desire. Her tears were not rebellion, but ritual, the last expression of childhood leaving her face. But for Rome's elite, the wedding night was only the beginning. In Part 5, we enter the hidden world of intimacy and hierarchy, where citizenship, slavery, and power dictated who could love and who could only serve. In the marble villas of Rome, power didn't end at the Senate or the battlefield. It extended into the bedchamber. Intimacy was hierarchy. The Roman household, or domus, was a miniature empire where every breath, glance, and touch obeyed invisible laws. The master ruled not only his estate but the bodies within it. Citizenship, birth, and ownership dictated desire. Freedom defined who could choose and who could not. Slavery blurred the boundaries of intimacy. Enslaved men and women weren't seen as people but as living extensions of their master's will, property that could be touched, used, or traded. Consent did not exist in the Roman lexicon for them. Their beauty could determine their fate. Their bodies were as much assets as gold or land. Among the elite, specific slaves were chosen for personal service. Attendants, hairdressers, musicians, or bedchamber companions trained to please without protest. Marcus Crassus, one of Rome's richest men, kept over 500 slaves in his city residence alone. Dozens were selected for their appearance and trained in music, conversation, or the subtler arts of companionship. At his evening gatherings, servants recited poetry, played the lyre, and, when the guests grew bold, performed acts meant to amuse or arouse. It was decadence disguised as culture, domination wrapped in refinement. For the enslaved, survival often meant submission. Some were forced into concubinage, a gray zone between lover and servant. They might bear children who legally belonged not to them, but to their master. Those children could be freed or sold, depending on the master's whim. The Romans called it familia, but to many within those walls, it was captivity with a gilded face. Pleasure was just another form of obedience. Roman writers seldom spoke of the suffering beneath this system. Instead, they wrote of grace, loyalty, or beauty, as though to polish cruelty into virtue. But every whisper of silk in those halls carried another sound beneath it, the quiet, unrecorded heartbeat of those denied a choice. Rome's glory depended on them, not its emperors, not its generals, but the forgotten bodies that sustained its illusions. But the rules of desire in Rome didn't stop at the threshold of slavery. In Part 6, we descend into the bathhouses, the steamy crossroads of politics, pleasure, and forbidden temptation. Few places in Rome reveal more about its soul than the bathhouse. These were not just places to cleanse the body, they were theaters of social life. Beneath vaulted ceilings and mosaic floors, senators, merchants, and soldiers stripped away their armor, their robes, and their pretenses. In the rising mist, everyone seemed equal, but equality was an illusion. The hierarchy remained, only hidden beneath the sheen of oil and sweat. The air shimmered with heat and murmurs. Steam blurred faces, turning strangers into silhouettes. Conversations drifted between idle gossip and secret deals. Senators discussed trade routes beside generals scarred from war. Musicians played softly near the caldarium, their notes echoing across marble pools. In this haze of warmth and whisper, alliances were born, reputations destroyed, and pleasures negotiated in silence. The baths were Rome's second senate, governed by bodies, not decrees. Not all who entered sought cleanliness. Many came for what the walls concealed. Separate chambers, curtained alcoves, and shadowed corridors allowed glances to become gestures, and gestures to become transactions. Here, the line between hygiene and indulgence vanished. Slaves offered massages that blurred into caresses. Attendants whispered invitations. Merchants bartered pleasure as casually as perfume. Behind polished stone and perfumed air, Rome's moral order melted with the heat. Seneca the Younger once complained bitterly about living above a bathhouse. I hear the groans of men being rubbed, the splash of water, the shrieks of plucked armpits. Yet what he described in disgust was the heartbeat of Roman life. The baths were noisy, raw, alive, filled with bodies negotiating power through posture and attention. Beneath the laughter and splashing, the empire's unspoken desires echoed louder than any prayer. For some, the bathhouse was liberation, a place to escape the rigid formalities of public life. For others, it was a stage of temptation and risk. A careless glance could destroy a career. A whispered word could start a scandal. Yet even emperors couldn't resist returning, drawn by that intoxicating mix of anonymity and exposure. A world where the powerful came to forget, and the powerless to be seen. But steam fades, and secrets never stay buried. In Part 7, we follow Rome's pursuit of beauty, where luxury turned lethal, and the price of perfection was measured in poison. In ancient Rome, beauty wasn't personal, it was political. A woman's face reflected her family's reputation, her husband's dignity, and her place in the social order. But the pursuit of perfection carried a hidden cost. The same powders and perfumes that made noblewomen shimmer beneath torchlight were slowly killing them. Elegance was a form of slow suicide, a quiet bargain between status and survival. Roman cosmetics were a mixture of wealth, superstition, and chemistry gone wrong. To achieve the coveted pale complexion, women applied thick layers of white paste made from lead carbonate. The substance corroded their skin, entered their bloodstream, and slowly poisoned their organs. Yet it remained the height of sophistication. To be pale was to be untouchable, the color of luxury, leisure, and class. The women who wore it glowed like statues, even as their bodies decayed beneath the illusion. For color, they turned to mercury, crushed cinnabar mixed with animal fat and rose oil, used to tint the lips and cheeks. The result was breathtaking and lethal. Over time, mercury blurred vision, blackened teeth, and ate through the nervous system. Physicians warned of its dangers, but fashion spoke louder than reason. Each morning, noble women transformed into living artworks, beautiful, admired, and doomed. Even eyeliner came with a curse. The coal that darkened Roman eyes contained antimony, another toxin absorbed through the skin. Ovid, ever the poet of pleasure, left behind recipes that read like spells. Mix white lead with vinegar, spread it thick across the face. For the lips, blend cinnabar with rose oil. What he didn't say was that these instructions painted death in slow motion. The very tools of allure became instruments of decay. Pain itself was part of beauty. Body hair was stripped away with burning tweezers, pine resin, and pumice stones. The women endured in silence as slave girls worked for hours, scraping, plucking, scorching, until the skin was raw and bleeding. Smoothness meant refinement. Agony meant prestige. The Roman elite wore their suffering like a secret crown, mistaking cruelty for grace. But beauty was only one battlefield. In Part 8, we uncover the darker side of control. The desperate measures Roman women took to master their own bodies, from forbidden herbs to deadly remedies. In a society built by men and ruled by bloodlines, Roman women had little control over their own bodies. Their worth was measured in fertility, their ability to conceive, carry, and deliver heirs. But behind the marble walls and honeyed prayers to Venus, there was another world. One of whispered recipes, secret herbs, and desperate risks. The struggle for autonomy began not in the Senate, but in the silence of women trying to survive their own biology. The most coveted herb in the ancient world was silphium, grown only in Cyrene, North Africa. It was famed as a miracle plant, used as perfume, spice, and most of all as contraception. So valuable was it that its image was stamped onto coins and traded like silver. A pinch too little meant pregnancy. A pinch too much meant death. By the 1st century AD, Silphium was harvested to extinction, consumed by the same desperation that had made it priceless. Other methods were more brutal. Some women inserted tufts of wool soaked in vinegar, honey, or cedar oil to block conception. Others swallowed potions mixed with copper rust, crushed beetles, or shards of metal, believing poison could protect them from pregnancy. Ancient physicians like Cyrenus of Ephesus documented these practices without judgment, describing ingredients that read like a catalog of pain. The boundary between medicine and suicide was razor-thin. Abortion, too, was legal and lethal. The fetus was considered part of the woman's body, not a separate being. Some sought help from midwives armed with herbs like rue, pennyroyal, or savon, substances that attacked the womb by poisoning the blood. Others turned to surgery. Without anesthesia, metal instruments were inserted deep within the body, guided only by instinct and hope. Many women died, their deaths explained away as fevers to preserve family honor. These were not acts of rebellion, they were acts of survival. In a world where law, religion, and culture gave women no control, knowledge became resistance. They passed secrets from mother to daughter, from slave to mistress. Each whispered recipe carried generations of fear and defiance. Their bodies were battlegrounds, and every heartbeat was an act of endurance against a system that called their suffering divine order. But even beyond life and death, Rome's passions found new forms. In Part 9, we explore the boundaries of desire, same-sex love, power, and emotion in a culture where dominance defined identity. In Rome, desire was not defined by gender, it was defined by hierarchy. To the Romans, love was political and sex was another form of conquest. A man's virtue lay not in whom he loved, but in how he loved, always as the dominant partner. Submission, no matter how tender, was considered weakness. The bedchamber mirrored the republic itself. Power flowed downward, never upward. Male-to-male relationships were common and often celebrated, provided the Roman citizen took the active role. To be penetrated, willingly or not, was to lose dignity, to fall beneath the status of a free man. Even Julius Caesar was haunted by rumors that, in his youth, he had been the passive lover of King Nicomedes of Bithynia. His enemies mocked him as the Queen of Bithynia, and though the accusation was likely political slander, it followed him all his life. Proof that in Rome shame was measured in posture, not passion. The Emperor Hadrian's love for Antinous broke every rule of restraint. When the youth drowned mysteriously in the Nile, Hadrian's grief consumed the empire. He declared Antinous a god, built temples in his honor, and founded a city that bore his name. The Senate was scandalized, not by the love itself, but by the depth of emotion. For an emperor to mourn so openly was dangerous. Affection was meant to be ruled, not surrendered to. Beyond the palaces and politics, gender itself blurred. In the temples of Cybele, male priests known as Galli castrated themselves in ecstatic devotion, living thereafter as women, neither fully male nor female, but something sacred and feared. Romans viewed them with fascination and disgust, calling them both holy and unclean. Their bodies defied the empire's laws of order. In their chants and bleeding offerings, they proclaimed that the gods cared little for human categories. Rome's fascination with desire was never about equality, it was about control. Love could elevate or destroy depending on who held the power. The empire's poets wrote verses that blurred tenderness with cruelty, passion with politics. And beneath every declaration of beauty was the same truth. In Rome, to love was to risk everything, reputation, freedom, even life itself. Yet Rome's appetite for desire didn't end with the living. In Part 10, we descend into the tombs, where love, loyalty, and lust followed the dead, carved forever in stone. Death did not silence Rome's passions. In the necropolises beyond the city walls, tombs told stories the living never dared to voice aloud. Carved in marble reliefs, painted in fading ochre, couples reclined side by side as if still at a feast. The wife's hand rested over her husband's heart, a gesture of eternal loyalty. To the Romans, love did not end with the body. It was something to be displayed, curated, preserved like a final performance for the gods. Some tombs went further, celebrating desire itself. Frescoes of lovers intertwined adorned the resting places of the wealthy. Archaeologists have found ivory hairpins, perfume bottles, and bronze mirrors buried beside the dead, remnants of sensuality, meant to follow them into eternity. For the Romans, sex and death were not opposites. They were mirrors. Both revealed the truth of the body, and both demanded surrender. Older men were expected to remain vigorous until the grave. Widows, by contrast, were shamed for desire, mocked as desperate if they sought love again. Juvenal wrote cruelly of such women, accusing them of indecency for refusing to fade quietly. Yet among the graffiti of Pompeii, another story survives. A message scrawled in charcoal by an unknown hand, old, but still burning. Perhaps, for all its cruelty, Rome could not erase longing. Slaves who loved each other carved their affection into anonymity. Zosimus loved Felix, reads one simple inscription. No statues, no monuments, just names scratched into stone by hands that knew freedom only in feeling. Through these fragments, we glimpse something eternal. That even in a world ruled by hierarchy, the heart resisted. Love, forbidden or fleeting, always found a way to write itself into history. As centuries passed, the ashes of Pompeii cooled, the frescoes faded, and the empires that followed rewrote the rules of virtue and shame. Yet beneath every civilization, Rome lingers, in our mirrors, in our perfumes, in the quiet choreography of intimacy. Its ghosts are not confined to ruins. They live in the way power still seeps into love, how beauty still demands pain, how control still masquerades as devotion. The marble has cracked, but the questions remain. What does it mean to love when love is shaped by dominance? What does it mean to desire in a world built on hierarchy? The Romans did not answer, they performed, they endured, they recorded. And in their silence, we find ourselves reflected. The past never truly dies. It simply changes costume. The same hunger, the same fear, the same heart, beating still beneath different names. We've walked through Rome's corridors of desire, from marble halls to volcanic ash, from whispered devotion to cruel ritual. What we found was not a foreign world, but a mirror. History does not erase the human heart. It only teaches us how little it has changed.